Hello, dear friends. Welcome to the 10 Laws podcast with East Forest. I'm East Forest, and I'm coming to you finally from my home in Boulder, Utah. The 5-week West Coast tour has come to a close, and I made it. That was a ringer. I mean, it was awesome, but it's a lot. I mean, to drive essentially from here in southern Utah up through Boise, up to Seattle, all the way down to San Diego, and then back here to Boulder, Utah. Over a lot of weeks, and as I might have mentioned things on the show in the past, we had like lots of great shows, good audiences, and lots of new experiences for me. We had the guy who smashed my window in Portland. We unfortunately had a gig we had to cancel there in the Bay Area. We did Esalen Retreat. It was out at Mammoth. Seattle, Eugene, Portland, all over the San Francisco Bay Area, down in Southern California. Man, I mean, I've never done that many ceremony concerts in a continuous stretch like that. And it's got my mind in a place. I think right now I'm just kind of needing to settle and rest and sort of process. What I really need is some ceremony to kind of let these deeper layers of my consciousness process what this whole trip was and what it meant to me and what I can learn from it and how to move forward. But right now I'm just listening to the sounds of cicadas outside here on my land. There's lots of wildflowers. Just had a visit with Rada, who brought down her kids, her daughter's boyfriend, who I didn't know. 15-year-old kids having boyfriends and girlfriends. All that happened. It's summertime. It is hot down here. And I'm just getting some things done so we can get this whole Ram Dass record out to you on August 9th, including the vinyl and the CD. Trying to get that stuff approved. I'm hearing it's Mercury retrograde, and I hate that kind of stuff. But then I was like, someone's like, well, it went out, but then it came back in. I was like, well, I thought it went out for like months. I'm like, well, not really. And I'm like, so if it's just all the time, then it's not really a thing, right? It's how can it? I refuse to accept that. I refuse that. We make the destinies, we make our present. And here I am. God damn it. So today we have on the show Dr. Dan Engle. Dr. Dan was coming to us, I believe, from Portland, Oregon. Very sweet guy, and he's got a lot of knowledge, not just about medicine and health and wellness, but it's sort of a holistic approach at well-being. So I think you will enjoy our conversation together. I'm sure I have some other business to tell you about, but my brain is fried, folks. It's like it's all the driving in the summer heat. Thank you for reviewing the podcast. It's real easy to do. Just give it 5 stars, or even better, write a little review. I have some gigs coming up. I know I'm in Burlington, Vermont, and also Cape Cod Yoga Festival later. I believe those are coming up at some point. We have got the East Forest Fall Retreat here in southern Utah. A couple spots left for that, so get on it if you're thinking about it. You can camp. There's some housing options left. Don't be afraid of the bunk rooms. They're super fun, and they're unbelievably inexpensive, so they're a fantastic deal. There's 2 wonderful bathrooms right next to them, so it's actually quite convenient, and you're right there in the lodge. We may have a couple off-campus options too. If you're really struggling, you want something different, you can always reach out and let us know. And you can just say hi, and if you have any questions or if you have any things you'd like to let me know about the podcast and so forth, you can do that at info@eastforest.org. I also, speaking of the vinyl, I got the test pressings for the Ram Dass vinyl. That's pretty exciting. You get 5 records of each. It's a double vinyl, so it's going to be a big gatefold double vinyl. So I have 10. I had 10 oh my God, 10 test pressings. 10 test pressings. 10 tests. I can't do it. But I listened to all of them, and it was so cool to hear the record be transformed into vinyl form. Hear that kind of analog flavor. I'm sure you're really going to enjoy that. We'll probably get a pre-order up for that soon-ish on eastforest.org. and then we'll get those shipped out in early August. So there'll be one pressing of that. And if you're into that kind of thing, if you want CDs, we're going to do one pressing of the CD too. The vinyl's kind of cool too because it has all the lyrics inside. When you fold it out, it's got the Maharaji painting on the back and the Ram Dass painting on the front by Elizabeth Hilton, and all the lyrics and like a glossary of terms. It's just gorgeous. And this beautiful splatter pattern, multicolored on the record. I think you're going to dig it very, very much. Yeah, that's it for now, folks. Let's get into this convo with Dr. Dan Engle.
It's great to be in Soul Land, to identify with your individual soul in the plane of consciousness, which I call Soul Land.
So thanks so much for joining me. I appreciate you giving me the time.
Yeah, it's good to be with you, East Force, for sure.
Where are you hailing from right now? Is it Portland?
Boulder, Colorado.
Oh, see, I'm in the other Boulder, Utah that no one's heard of. Yeah.
Nice.
Yeah. So we're in sister cities, so to speak.
I'm a fan of being in places where nobody's heard of.
You're in the wrong place. Yeah.
It's a bit true.
So your name came up to me from a friend of mine named Bree, who I believe is doing some kind of like year-long, I don't really know what to call it, training program or something with Aubrey Marcus. And I believe you were somehow involved with that. And I was out there playing a gig in her neck of the woods in Austin, and she was like, "Oh, you gotta check out this guy, Dr. Dan." And I said, "Okay." So I checked you out, and I thought, "Oh yeah, there's a lot of synergy with our thoughts and our ideas." And I thought there's a lot we could get into that I know if I'm into it, there's other people out there who are listening to this who are into it too. And so I just wanted to explore that space. Can you tell me a little bit about what that is you're doing with Aubrey?
Yeah, that's his year-long mastermind program called Fit for Service. Mm-hmm. And I've known Aubrey for going on probably 8-9 years. And I've been involved with other projects and programs that he's done. I've been involved with Onnit, one of the companies that he started, a peak performance company. And when he was telling me about his Fit for Service mastermind and the platform that he was going to use, there's a lot of overlap between that platform and the coaching style that I work with in my clients. We're just moving them through a process of personal discovery, exploration, healing, and optimization of body, mind, heart, and soul. And it's cool for me to just catch up with Aubrey at different points when I get the chance. So being a part of Fit for Service is pretty natural.
Yeah. So let me ask you about what you just said there. So you called it coaching, but you're a medical doctor, right? And give us just a quick little background on how you I'm guessing, had somewhat of a more traditional path and started to emerge into this space of your own that is more functional, full spectrum medicine, as you call it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, sure. Yeah, my background's in psychiatry and neurology. I also did 2 fellowships in psychiatry, one in forensic psychiatry, one in child psychiatry. So I was in school for 20 years, 25, 20, somewhere between 20 and 25 years. And after all my medical training, I was running clinics in integrative psychiatry. And they were great, helpful, doing good work as far as helping people get off of medications. But it's had still not quite all of the aspects that I was really looking for, particularly on the level of the soul. And I was introduced to ayahuasca. And in one weekend with ayahuasca, I learned more about myself than in 1 decade of psychotherapy. So I was pretty sold. Pretty quickly moved down to the jungle. I lived in an ashram for a little while, then moved down to the jungle. Went through an apprenticeship program, eventually came back. Had a bit of a rocky time integrating because I had been so used to living at the pace of nature, and then to come back into really busy cultural dynamics and such competitive, consumptive, psyches were a little discombobulating. So it took me a couple of years to really integrate back. And that was about the time I met Ob. And then we started doing some programs and projects together. I was going in and out of South America for documentaries and supporting some communities and organizations there. And eventually landed back with some more consistency in my life and started running a clinic again. And when I'm working with private clients, most of the time it's virtual because people are finding me through a variety of different podcasts or interviews. And they want to either talk about how to optimize where they're at and what they're doing, potentially come off of medication so that they can have an experience. And then I'll point them into a center or one of the centers that I know or am affiliated with outside the country for medicine work and then help them integrate it. So a lot of the work that I do with clients is more coaching than it is therapy because it's more goal directed and keeping the person in the driver's seat of their own process and using the medicine experience as a way to leverage personal clarity and personal truth, and then supporting that with what I've been trained in with psychotherapy and a variety of other technologies to help clarify what that truth is now, integrating it into a workable system so that they can use in their lives.
Yeah. How much of that integration or that work you're doing with people is around diet? Because I often think about, as we can feel sometimes like just the basic machine that we're in, if our chemicals are off or the food we're feeding it, or I don't know, if we all have like particular diets and foods that maybe work better with our brains.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes that can have a lot to do with depression and how we feel. It's sort of like you're trying to climb out of a hole and you have perhaps a peak or profound experience with a psychedelic and you're trying to make these changes in your life. I mean, is that something, do you start from there often or how does that come in?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's pretty individual specific as far as where we start, but a foundational pillar for optimized bodies and physiology is definitely diet, as well as movement, stress management, optimal sleep, breath practices, and then some technologies. But diet is a huge, important factor. And I run centers specifically focused on diet and diet recovery and diet restoration, and seen just massive healing in people's lives and consciousness just focusing on diet itself.
Yeah. Do you find that there's sort of any broad spectrum stuff about diet that does apply to just about everyone?
Yeah, we're built to be pretty close to nature. Mm-hmm. And so when we have dietary programs and approaches that are organic, more simple, has little processed foods, taking it from what it would be experienced in nature to what we're actually consuming in our bodies, eating in season, and with as close geographic proximity as possible to where we're living, and with the seasonal varieties, because it's good to be able to eat not only seasonal because it just makes sense with the carbon footprint, but also because it's nice to have rotations in our diet that are related to the season of where we're living.
Sure.
Mm-hmm. And with as little pesticide or chemical residue, so as organic or beyond organic as possible.
Yeah, that's a tough one these days because I feel like you have to be a bit of a detective to even know like what it is that's in your food from a chemical perspective, because organic doesn't cover everything. And then you get into things like BPAs and other preservatives. It's kind of a deep rabbit hole for folks in the grocery store.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I tend to encourage people that as best they can shop in the outer aisles versus the middle aisles.
Yeah.
Just
Totally.
because it's typically more simple and close to nature and things that we would want to just prepare on our own versus getting prepackaged or pre-prepared foods.
Yeah. Avoid things in a box, maybe.
Yeah.
So let's talk a little bit about this role of psychedelics and psychedelic therapy. I mean, as I mentioned to you before the podcast, that's something that I crossed paths with. And my music began in the ceremony space and sort of evolved into a more public space, but I'm still kind of working to keep those roots. And especially with that latest release, that was quite pointedly directed towards the psilocybin experience and giving people tools like that. How are you? I mean, we just had the decriminalization of psilocybin in Denver last week or a little bit ago. What are you seeing the future of this, and how can we kind of bring this into so it reaches more people, perhaps in a way that isn't just behind the gate of a research study or perhaps a really expensive therapy setting? Do you see any promise there of it being a little more egalitarian?
Yeah, for sure. Absolutely. And I don't think it's going to be without some challenge. For example, Big Pharma is the biggest player in corporatized, globalized medicine right now. And they're going to have an influence. And there might be potential threat to their consumer base. And there's also probably going to be opportunity that they're going to try and leverage, like they're trying to do with medical cannabis historically, currently medical CBD, medical ketamine. So Big Pharma is out for the profit margins and not always focused on the long-term benefit and health to their clients. But that's not to say that pharmaceuticals don't have a place. And I think there's an opportunity to be creative in the space in between, but I don't think it's going to be without some challenge. If we had open availability to do what we want to do, I think it makes sense to have decriminalization passed consistently, because people shouldn't end up going to jail for possession. And you could get into the conversation of, well, does it make sense to have fines or some kind of recognition that there's space that can be still abused in the trafficking or production of these. I'm getting more and more appreciative of the legal landscape just because I'm in more of the political conversations now. And
yeah, ditto.
Yeah. So I can see some of the rationale to have some regulatory agency, but I also have a lot of friends in the space that are, very, very firmly, and I have in the past been very firmly committed to making these tools available to the masses, particularly the people that need them the most. And when you have regulatory agencies coming in and trying to make the appropriate measures systemically that keep in mind that these tools are very powerful and many people are using them without clear training or consideration to the ramifications and the contraindications. And
yes,
ultimately, the last thing we want to do is create more trauma. We're actually wanting to use these to heal trauma, and we don't want to recapitulate what happened in the 60s that was really inflammatory to the administration and really scary for a lot of people in the general masses that didn't want so much revolution happening in such a quick order. And so it was a really polarizing time, and I think we're in another polarizing time. But if we do use these medicines in the right way and try and maximize their potential for efficacy and minimize their potential for challenge, then I think it actually, these medicines and the whole psychedelic renaissance can actually build bridges instead of building walls. So they can start to collapse the gap between these polarizing different thoughts in the cultural mainstream right now. So I believe these medicines are actually phenomenal tools, not only individually for healing what we're each going through internally, but also for healing the collective psyche and building more effective models of cooperation.
Yeah, I mean, we are at a precipice as a civilization. At least it certainly feels that we don't have the luxury of maybe even decades to kind of let things unfold at sort of their own pace. Maybe it needs a level of personal activism to kind of transform our own wounds and issues so that we can kind of bring something from the inside out into the world. I mean, the crises that we face globally perhaps are going to be reflected internally and personally for us. And I'm not advocating to say that, I do not believe at all that psychedelics are something that's for everyone. And I'm not like standing on the bandstand, putting that on my mantle, like as my main thing. But I just have to be honest about my own personal path and how it changed my life. It sounds like it did yours too, in a pretty profound way. And in some ways, as you spoke to it, like a somewhat fast way, like it sounds like you had one life and you went down, had this experience, and it was strong enough that you made decisions with real clarity about changing your own life. And that's a bold thing. It really is. I mean, it must have taken a lot. You must have had some self-doubt, but at the same time, a lot of clarity about that choice that came somehow from that experience. I mean, is that what happened?
Yeah, I'm the first one in my family to go to college. And so when I ended up in medicine, there wasn't a whole lot of pressure to do one thing in particular. Yeah. And I grew up in sports and athletics and have an adventure spirit. So for me, there was perhaps some more willingness and availability to explore a really out-of-the-box treatment and therapy and make a really out-of-the-box move by closing my clinic and moving down to the jungle. Everybody from the outside that didn't know me thought that was just crazy, including my family. But my friends and the people that knew me more intimately could see the trajectory of that choice and what had been growing in my curiosity about what was happening at a deeper level. And so it was very much like the hero's journey, which that first stage is the call to action. When we've been living life as usual, or the world at large, and we're called to the journey ahead, that's going to be a very different experience of consciousness when we come out of it. And I wasn't fully aware that was the choice that I was making at the time, but it's clear that was what was happening now if I look at it in retrospect. And I just knew. There was a level of a soul knowing that these were technologies that I wanted to investigate. And I had spent 10 years studying psychiatry and neurology and trying to figure out the nature of the mind and the brain. And working with ayahuasca made so much of what I had studied look like kindergarten.
Yeah, the first time I experienced ayahuasca was about 10 years ago. And I remember in the circle, there were several professional psychiatrists and psychologists, like obviously they're doing their own personal work, but they were all very fascinated with exploring that inner landscape for themselves, like deeply. And that was sort of like a theme I saw. So it's really interesting that for you too. It's sort of like, wow, this is the stuff I've been studying, and now I'm like, it's like now in Technicolor coming alive in such a profound way.
Yeah. And when we look historically at the nature of psychiatry, psyche means soul just as much as it means mind. And psychiatrists historically in the arena of other disciplines, our first and foremost dedication is to be healers and facilitators of healers for our clients on the level of the mind and on the level of the soul, first and foremost.
Yeah.
And then secondarily, at the level of the brain and the level of the neurochemistry. But psychiatry as a field has sold its own soul, so to speak, to the pharmaceutical industry. Whereas most of what's taught right now is all about receptors and receptor profiles and new novel ways to adjust those, versus what's happening at the deeper levels and aspects of the mind and the soul that are driving the experience of life in the first place.
Well, how do you find that we speak to the soul?
Oh, that's a great question. And I think we're starting to reclaim more and more of that in the cultural zeitgeist itself. Because medicine is just going to reflect what's happening in culture. Which is one of the reasons I think right now we're moving into this larger landscape and field of transformational medicine. Appreciating that allopathic medicine has its own place, and that turned into integrative and functional medicine over the last 10 to 20 years, but it's still only a part of the entire connection and collective process of this transformational culture that we find ourselves in, where people are desiring to have the transcendent experience offer them a new way of experiencing their lives, and they're willing to take out significant periods of time, energy, money, resources in order to have these experiences, and to pop out with a new consciousness and integrate that consciousness into a new working model for how they live.
I've always found that music speaks to the soul for me, sort of this trans language experience, and something about the role of ceremony too, as a technology that helps us speak to the soul and speak to those deeper parts of our brain, the unconscious, the subconscious, and sort of plant seeds, work with trauma. It seems to be an important vehicle.
Yeah, music's an amazing vehicle. And
not biased, but
understandably so, and that's why you're in the field that you're in, and it makes sense. There's these different ways to access soulful experience, transcendent experience, and psychedelic medicines are just one of those. We have trance dances that are very integrated with medicine, as well as these very deep inner experiences of insulated primary connection to our own divinity. And that could be in deep isolation in the jungle or in nature itself, communing with the plants. This is what are called dietas, or essentially isolated silent meditation retreats with little to no food in communion with the natural world, up to things that are more strong and moving experiences like holotropic breath work, which Stan Groff started using once all the psychedelics went illegal, and he found that he could use breath work and particular breath practices to stimulate experience of ecstasy or transcendence. And so we have all these really interesting and phenomenal historical tools that are now taking oftentimes a new contemporary evolution or modern expression, but still based in the same rituals and ceremonies that you're describing. And people can go through an experience with pretty consistent results of a transcendent experience, offering them more awareness of who they are and the full totality of their humanity and what they're here to do and to contribute to the collective.
Yeah, I mean, why do you think, if we just step back for a second, that psychedelic plants and fungi even exist? Like, how incredible is it? It's so many. And it's so strange that we're on this planet, and then somehow through the evolution of all of this, there's these substances that link up with our brains so easily, and then a lot of them with such little toxicity, and just kind of, the way it goes through the blood-brain barrier. What, have you ever thought about why, or what? How odd that is?
Yeah, I've thought a lot about it in the past. It doesn't seem as odd as it to me now as it did at times in the past. And this is where we get into more of a philosophical kind of conversation about what we're here to do in life school.
It's my favorite conversation.
Yeah. I tend to think that life is school, and it's part of the evolutionary process of our soul. And each experience in this one body temple It's just a day in the soul's evolution and continuum of learning. And I do believe there's been this parallel process of evolution that has occurred in our relationship with medicines. So Terence McKenna and Dennis McKenna have this stoned ape theory that Paul Stamets evolved into a stoned ape hypothesis that essentially says we were likely supported in our evolution from a previous species of Homo erectus that stimulated into Homo sapiens when we had this massive increase in the expansion of our neural networks and our neurochemistry, and particularly these parts of the brain in the front that allow for more coordination and communication, personal observation, consciousness. And with this massive evolution in our brain's capacity and levels of consciousness, that it was quite likely stimulated by our foraging of mushrooms 200 to 300,000 years ago, when we can see in the fossil records that we were foraging and we were working with these medicines. And this was about the time that we had this evolutionary leap in our brain's capacity and function. And it's also fascinating that mushroom spores, until recently, were the only known living species that could survive the vacuum of space. And now in the last 10 years, we've seen other super small little bugs that can do that too. So then there was a thought, well, maybe mushrooms just hitchhiked on an asteroid from somewhere else. And that asteroid hit the Earth, and then it started to impregnate this mycelial network. And when you look at the mycelial network, the little fruiting bodies, the mushrooms that pop up above ground, they're just these small little, tips of the iceberg. And this whole mycelial network is very much like the neural network in the brain. And psilocybin and DMT, the active mind expansion chemical molecule, looks very much like serotonin, which is very much related to mood and consciousness.
Yeah, something like the largest living organism is a mycelial mushroom network in Eastern Oregon, supposedly. I mean, it's nonetheless, the idea of panspermia of mushroom spores coming from an exoplanetary situation. It's also still the fact that we have all these other psychedelic compounds here on the planet, even DMT, which is produced in our own bodies and then is in many plants. It's interesting. It's just, as you said, a philosophical look into just sort of the why. It makes me think about, because they're so powerful in how they interface with our consciousness, it feels like there's a purpose to that, or an evolutionary reason, sort of like, these major points of our lives, how they sort of shock us into perspective. And perhaps even on a physical level, which is something I kind of wanted to ask you about. Some people report anecdotally, and there's a couple studies who've looked into this a little bit, about like psilocybin and depression, for instance, or psilocybin and cluster headaches. And almost in a sense, like there's a chemical something going on that may beyond the spiritual element that also helps your mood, that there's something actually going on chemically and physically. Have you had any experience with that or looked into that at all?
The process of repeat that part of the question.
Kind of like the way we think maybe psilocybin might help with depression, on a beyond just the fact that you're having a profound spiritual experience, like perhaps actually chemically there's something going on with the compound.
Yeah, I don't think it's accidental that we're exploring this psychedelic renaissance in the midst of the largest epidemic of mental illness that we've ever seen on the planet.
Right. Very interesting.
I think there's a recognition of the benefit of these tools of consciousness and using them more collectively in effective ways to be able to support people's resolution of those epidemics. And I think there's a lot also that's related to the ways that we're out of balance in our culture that lead to the mental illness in the first place, and how these medicines help to bring us back into a right way of living and a right way of relating to ourselves and one another. And so that, yes, they're helping neurochemically rehabilitate serotonergic receptors. Like ayahuasca is very good at that. Psilocybin is very good at that. And even at a deeper level of mind, heart, and soul, they're helping to reconnect us into a more whole experience of self and life. That we start to heal these traumatic parts of ourselves, integrate them into a more mature, full spectrum human. And through that level of wholeness and awareness, that we're more willing and available to positively serve the collective, because we recognize everything's connected. There's no away. I don't just throw something away and it magically goes somewhere else in a healthy way. If I throw something away, it just goes conveniently out of my awareness and oftentimes ends up significantly negatively altering the natural landscape. For example, like these mile-wide islands of plastic in the ocean, and these poor beluga and humpback whales that wash up on the shore with their bellies full of plastic, and cutting out deeper and wider tracts of jungle, something like the size of Connecticut every day. All these things that are horribly detrimental to the natural environment and obviously unsustainable. And if we don't wake up and get our stuff together pretty quick, we are going to pass the point of return ecologically. I do believe there's always room for faith and hope and creativity and adaptability, because we're really good when pressed in crisis to stimulate transformation and get creative with new novel technologies and adaptability, and we're extraordinarily adaptable. But I would rather us come into a right way of living before we continue to just massively ecologically degrade our natural resources. And it's happening as we speak. There's something like 100 species go extinct every day.
It's profound. I mean, if you look into any of these issues, whether it's peak soil, peak oil, peak energy, any of them, they're all each individually a crisis that can take us down. And it's much deeper and worse than any of us really recognize as you look at these issues. And it's enormous. And sort of the level of participation that you can't fully opt out either of all systems anymore. And that's a different way of being now. Like, we are integrated globally also, which is a different way of being. I mean, are you hopeful? You know, I'm sure you have days where we vacillate here and there, but
I'm super hopeful.
You are.
Absolutely. And I do believe even if we just rested in this philosophical conversation that Earth is school and we're evolving our consciousness, we have chosen to collectively incarnate in the most dynamic time in human history. There's never been the opportunity to make global change as quick and profoundly as we can now. So I think our opportunity is great. I think our challenge is also great. And I think our ability to rise to that challenge, meet the opportunity, and to choose. Like Yoda tells Luke Skywalker, you know, there's the light side of the dark and the not so, and the dark side, the light side of the Force and the dark side of the Force. And or the old Cherokee saying, where the young grandson is around the campfire and he looks at his grandfather. He says, there are these two wolves who are fighting within me. One is for good and one's for evil. I'm not sure who's going to win. And the grandfather says, whichever one you feed. And so I do believe that we have this awesome opportunity to do what is ours to do and what is uniquely ours to do. And ideally, as specifically and authentically, that is our own unique genius and our blueprint for service and this like fractal of the divine that's going to be unique and beautiful for everybody. And it doesn't have to be a difference in scale or grandiosity to be any more effective. It can be just tending the garden and raising my children well as the next generation of superheroes, which is a super important role. Just as important as being Tony Robbins and Richard Branson and the Dalai Lama and like whoever your favorite hero is that's doing like big, so to speak, things in the world. I think we each have our own role, and we get to choose love, and we get to choose faith, and we get to choose cooperation. There was this book I read about 8 years ago or so that really just solidified that for me, and it's called The Fifth Sacred Thing. And it's very much about this cultural experience of cooperation and love and right relationship with one another and the planet that is threatened by this outside agency of the corporatized war machine and privatized prison system. So very much, and this is written 30 years ago by Starhawk, and it's very much still the conversation now. And how do you best engage that threat? And how do we continue to come back to the values and the virtues of cooperative living and what feel the best? Love feels better than hate. Cooperation feels better than competition. I mean, I come from deep experience in competitive athletics, so I love the friendly competition, but I'm talking about like the experience of life and living itself.
Empathy, yeah.
Empathy and compassion.
Separateness versus, not separate.
All of those things. It was a really powerful book, beautiful like treatise. And now I very much believe that we've chosen to come in at a really dynamic time, and we are up-leveling our consciousness significantly. But I think there's a parallel track. And, I also watched the movie Idiocracy, and I had to turn it off halfway through because it was just so potentially true. I know, it was like, oh my gosh, holy shit, is that happening?
Yeah.
And so I do believe there's a parallel path happening, and we get to choose how we want to play the game. And we don't know how it's going to end. And that's part of being in the hero's journey itself. We don't is the hero going to be saved? Maybe, maybe not. Is the hero... but what does being saved look like?
And what does it end? Yeah.
Right. And if we do believe that life is just school and this life is just a day in the soul's evolution, then I'm doing my best to learn my life lesson here in the here and now with full recognition and faith that this is a process of transformation that's well beyond just this one monkey suit.
It's well beyond the monkey suit. And still we live inside the paradoxes such as that we have this destiny, yet we have individual choice. And as you said, the actions tending the garden somehow are just as valuable as the Dalai Lama writing a new book, so to speak. Mm-hmm. And like caring for a sick family member has the same value as perhaps working with millions of people. And there's on one level, there's an obvious sort of saying, well, that's ridiculous. But my heart tells me that's true. And there's sort of like some sort of universe energy, like on the smallest level, like the sort of the reactions of that love with the sick elder versus the reaction of that action with masses. It's like this, it's the same burst of energy from my heart in a way. Mm-hmm. And it seems I just feel like it matters. And then at the same time, we're faced with actual crises, and I'm faced with witnessing suffering on a global scale. If you choose to look at the news, which I go in and out of relationship with, you basically get the worst news of the day from the planet. Mm-hmm. And that's unusual in human history to be able to pick up on that vibration. My friend likes to call it information sickness. We're sort of inundated with just too much, and we're sick with information. And we certainly are hit with more data and information than humans have ever been hit with every day. I don't remember the stat. It was something like, I don't remember, up until 1950 or something, like all newspapers, all information, all newspapers of all time, like we do that now in like a day, 1.7 days or something. That it's just this compression of information. But my point is that we still have to make choices about how to live in a way that we feel is right livelihood, that we feel essentially that, I think we can die well. And we're all on a different path of awareness about what that is for us individually. And for some of us, perhaps we're more, quote, asleep or very lost in that process. But nonetheless, we're making choices, however awake those choices are, into that which we think is going to propel us into the world in a way that feels right for us. So I don't know if you, like, I feel like a lot of your work is sort of clearing away things and becoming clear with our body, with our brain, with our soul, so that we can move out in the world in a way that feels clear and feels right and feels personal to our journey. And certainly there's not a one-size-fits-all approach. But one of the criticisms of the spiritual community, maybe even the psychedelic community, and I'm just playing devil's advocate here, is a lack of activism or a lack of action. And it's like, what do we do? It's like there are emergencies happening, or there's people like suffering on levels with a lack of privilege beyond our certainly white male point of view. So do you find that there's how people do that dance of like, yes, it matters working in the garden, and yes, at the same time, what do we do or not do, or how do we face this choice of like, it's too much to do?
Yeah, there can be a bit of a paralysis that happens when it feels like the scope of the situation is so big.
And knowing how to help in a way that feels effective and right to you. And still just managing your life, right? We're just trying to get by day to day.
Yeah, it's true. And even the Dalai Lama is speaking more and more about activism.
Yeah, he had a recent book, I heard, a little one written to millennials about activism.
Yeah, it was a really good one. And I remember it's a red cover, and I'm desiring to remember the title now.
Yeah, I think it was like a couple weeks ago or a couple months ago.
And there was this growing movement in the young Buddhist community around activism and around waking up and getting engaged. And still doing that from a place of peace, but doing it from a place of engagement with the process of reclaiming our compassion and love in action, and being of service, and taking our meditation off the cushion into the world. And I do believe that what you said is also true, that a lot of our process of evolution is remembering our divinity, remembering our unity, remembering our level of connection, re-engaging reverence, and seeing everything as a aspect of the divine. And that's the things that look bad, so to speak, as well as the things that look good. Right? If it's just full spectrum consciousness, then we're playing it all out, and it all resides within us. It's just that we have this whole buffet of options in how we choose to live our lives, and we get to choose which wolf we feed. Are we feeding the process of joy and love and compassion and forgiveness, or are we feeding the experiences of hatred and resentment and violence and judgment and shame and violence? And we have violence now in ways that we've never seen it before, like cyberbullying through social media, and people committing young adults committing suicide.
Isn't it crazy how Melania Trump's campaign is about cyberbullying and how like it's almost like, are you serious? Is that a joke? Like your husband is the biggest cyber bully. It's like it's unbelievable, the tone deafness of like, and it's absolutely blind to the irony, you know?
Yeah. I didn't even know she had a campaign on that.
That was like her. That was her thing. Yeah, it was like I'm gonna combat cyberbullyism and bring it to light. That's my campaign, and everyone's just staring at her with like deaf eyes.
Yeah, you may just want to start at home.
Yeah, it's like you can make a real big difference if you start with this guy. He's kind of the leader.
Yeah, it's fascinating. You know, and Trump is a beautiful expression of the masculine archetype run amok.
Yeah, it's like the ultimate court jester, the ultimate mirror in a way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's all a reflection within our own psyches and our own hearts. How am I shaming my own feminine creativity and vulnerability and love and compassion and all those more feminine aspects? We all have, this is one of the cardinal laws of the universe from the Kabbalion, the 7 governing principles of the universe is gender. Everything has a component of masculine and feminine archetypes. Mm-hmm. And if I am subjugating and oppressing and creating violence against women, I'm likely doing that within my own self, and that's usually because of trauma. And the other way around also, if I'm emasculating the masculine archetype and making him, so wrong for everything that's happened, then how am I doing that in my own self? And just looking at the mirror and projecting through it. Now, very much, yes, the masculine archetype and the oppressive Western extractive culture has had the dominant landscape over the last 2,000+ years, to the active oppression of women, to the active oppression and commoditization of the natural environment, our global mother. And we're seeing that now come into greater balance with the Me Too movement and men that were drastically and significantly misusing their power being called out and having that come to terms. But at the same time, we've elected the biggest, right? It was, and that was very clear that was known.
Oh yeah. It's so crazy.
In the most big way. There was like no way to even deny it, which he tried to do initially.
It was black and white.
It was so there, and it was still so, it was so desperate, the choice that many people had to have something different in politics, even if it meant this person who is actively against protecting or having the right relationship with a natural environment, who's actively against building bridges instead of walls, who's actively subjugating women and creating violence. There was still so much frustration with the current political landscape over the last several decades and even longer, that there was still the desire to have something new.
Willing to accept something so grotesque because of their disgust or sort of their repulsion to a system that they felt was so broken. Now, not that that's the best path to take, but that was the only path they saw. It's like, let's just burn the house down. Mm-hmm. Even though that's a pretty, not a lot of foresight in that desire. Mm-hmm. But it actually is like, this Trump is a symptom of like the reflection of where we're at. We kind of dreamt him into existence, but yet that's another symptom of sort of the state of the state, the state of our culture of feeling like us versus them. Like what happened to like the people for the people? That got lost a long time ago.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's phenomenal. The time we're in right now. And I do very much believe that crisis precedes transformation every time, because it stimulates us for action. And it's hard to know what's coming on the other side of that crisis. The caterpillar has no concept of what's going to be like to be a butterfly. Mm-hmm. And yet there's this process in the cocoon of this crazy metamorphosis. And that means bringing all of our shadow into awareness, all aspects of ourself, going through this huge reclamation process that's very oftentimes pretty uncomfortable.
Oh God. Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. I mean, just thinking about it personally, it's like, yeah, this stuff is unbelievably uncomfortable, to face some of these things.
Yeah. And hence the benefit of using many of these tools of consciousness like medicines in a therapeutic context. Because it's super hard. For most people, it's impossible to be both the healer and the healed at the same time. So if we're using medicines in a recreational setting in order to, grow and expand, I get it. I've done that. There's a place for that. But if we're talking about the full expression of our healing and the full awakening of our human potential and our consciousness, then we very much need to have the therapeutic container of these medicines being used in the right way so that we can have the facilitation of that healing while we're in the regressed state of that earlier experience or that earlier trauma. And then have the full voice of that trauma or that exiled part of ourself that was so scared and needed to be cut off because of, threat to survival. We reclaim these parts of ourselves. We reclaim our shadow. We reclaim our shame and our guilt and all these different aspects into a state of awareness and ultimately healing and integration into a greater and process of becoming and evolving and therefore becoming like Jesus said, all these things that I do and have done, you can do and more. And through that process of metamorphosis and reclamation of all parts of ourselves, we become greater than we ever thought possible. More loving, more compassionate, more awake to who we are, and more available to do the service that is called for us to do right now.
Seems to have a lot to do with trust and also a level of self-action and self-examination and patience and compassion. There's a lot going on these days. There are a lot of tools as well, but it's interesting and confusing times. So just to honor your time and to wrap things up here soon, I just would curious on a more personal level, like, what's kind of the edge you're working at currently, or what's that you've been rubbing up against in your own personal transformation with, around these topics, or just personally that you're coming against?
Yeah, well, the big prayer that I had when I started the medicine path was, help me open my heart. Because I went through a separation and a divorce, and I couldn't feel it. My emotional landscape was super repressed. My emotional armor was super strong because of how I was raised and just like cultural stuff and all that. And I knew that's how I didn't want to continue to live that way. So I had a real big prayer. Please help open up my heart. And very shortly after that, I was introduced to ayahuasca. And very shortly after that, it was like all of that prayer started to get answered. But I didn't realize that in order to fully experience the embodiment of that prayer, I was going to have to come up close and personal with everything that had closed my heart off. And that meant like real deep trauma work and real deep personal investigation and over a long period of time. So now my prayer is to help me learn to love it all. Not just now that I've learned to open my heart, help me understand the divinity and the beauty and the love that's here everywhere. And so that I can, yes, be in action, yes, be a spokesperson and a architect of transformational medicine. That's my service work to do. That's what I've been groomed to do. And in the process of doing that, can I still hold on to what I choose to experience as my own faith through this life arc and evolution, that I have the opportunity to choose love in every moment and choose growth and choose faith and choose that which feels nourishing and fulfilling at a soul level. And also be fully embodied to share in the grief of the challenges that we experience. Because it is when we really take a close look at how much tragedy is happening in the natural environment. There's a level of grief that I don't think we're willing to collectively metabolize because it's so massive. But I do believe that the Earth's going through its own evolution. And if we fuck up and we're no longer the dominant species and there's another mass extinction, the Earth will continue to evolve. And she's been through a lot of extinctions in the past, at least 7 that we know of. And she'll be fine. And if I know that my soul's evolution is still on a trajectory of growth and expanded states of consciousness and learning, even outside of this body, then I can have faith that I'm doing what is my work to do and just do that to the best of my ability.
Yeah. Do you feel that this is all sort of just God returning to God for the sake of, I suppose, experience and expanding a sense of love because it can?
Yeah, maybe that'll be part of our lead into our next conversation.
Well, thanks for giving us your time. Where can people find your work?
Yeah, thanks for asking. There's a few different places that people typically track me down at, and one is Full Spectrum Medicine, and that's the education advocacy platform that we've built, and we're going through a massive expansion of that project right now. But there's some good stuff on there at the moment. FullSpectrumMedicine.com, drdaningle.com, DRDANENGLE, and that's just more about my own work and what I do with clients. I'm medically directing a neurological recovery center right now because there's two things that I geek out on. One, psychedelic research, and one is neurocognitive restoration after people have had some kind of injury. So we work with people healing traumatic brain injury, stroke, concussion, and that's at Revive, ReviveCentersPlural.com. And the Concussion Repair Manual is a book that I launched a couple of years back to just give people a user's manual and a hands-on guide for healing the brain, but also optimizing their brain if they've had any bonks or significant injuries.
You're busy, Dr. Dan.
There's a fair bit going on. Yeah.
Well, awesome. Thanks for talking. I hope to connect again sometime, and I really appreciate all your time and energy.
Yeah, likewise. East Forest, it's been a great conversation. I look forward to the next time.
Right on.
All right.
Thank you, Dr. Dan. Thank you, Dan. Really enjoyed getting to know him, and I hope to continue these conversations, have another one sometime with him. Such a sweet guy, and it's really happy he could come on the show. This song you're hearing in the background is Soul Land, featuring Laura Bird of the Minor Birds. That is from Chapter 3 of Ram Dass. Hope you're enjoying that chapter. Chapter 4, which is the whole record, a 14-song complete record, as I've always intended it to be listened to, is coming out on August 9th, so really soon. I've also just added a date at the Neem Karoli Baba Ashram. They're having a grand opening of the temple they've been working on there for a long time in Taos, New Mexico on July 13th. So it might be free or, sort of a donation type thing. That's going to be a beautiful, beautiful event if you want to come out to Taos, New Mexico. All that info is on eastforest.org/tour. Another thing is, it's looking like the August 9th release date in Los Angeles is not going to be in Los Angeles. It's going to be somewhere else. Still trying to figure that out, so I'll fill you in next week on the show about what's going on with that and where it's going to be. We're going to do something, and we're working on filming it so more people can enjoy it too, but TBA on that one. Burlington is September 19th at Higher Ground. Cape Cod, Mass. at the Love Yoga Fest, September 21st and 22nd. Of course, the Spirit Dive Southern Utah Retreat, East Forest, September 26th through 29th, also with Marissa Rada Wepner. And SAND, Science and Non-Duality Conference, October 25th through 27th. There will be more. I'm going to recharge. I will come out and say hi on the road again, and we're going to continue this experiment together, continue this walk of love. And I just thank you. Thank you for so much, everyone who came out to a show on this tour. It was so heartwarming to meet folks face to face and make this work about souls just witnessing one another and holding one another. And it really makes it worth it for me. So thank you very much. And keep walking your walk. Don't take any shit. But if you do, you know what to do. Do it with grace.
You meet other souls. You meet your pod, soul pod, that have been with you infinitely. Soul land, soul land, soul land. Contains God.